Life, of course, a novel about the Great Depression. The novel about the Great Depression, I would make a claim to say. Um, and one of the things that historical events that, especially the first part of this book, is about is the Dust Bowl event that came over the Midwest, which caused this great migration westward to California. Um, as you guys will come to find out, what happened is thousands of people moved west, hundreds of thousands of people. There simply wasn't jobs for them out there. But they would send these advertisements out saying, hey, there's plenty of abundant work in the West. The West is the promised land, right? There's almost like a biblical sort of rhetoric that the West is a promised land and all their troubles will come to an end and all this type of stuff. But one thing you might just not, I think you get a good appreciation of reading about it in the book. One of the things that really struck Steinbeck's imagination was this documentary that came out. This was early film, right, in the 1930s. It was this documentary that came out called the Plow That Broke the Plains. And it kind of shows you the ecological consequences as far as what happened in Oklahoma and the Nebraska and those like Midwest states. So I'm going to show you guys just a few minutes of it. Um, we'll see. Let me see if I've never shared something using Google Doc before, so hopefully this works. Yes, I think it will. So the whole film's kind of about farming and how the first part of it's about farming and how the American people went to farmland in the West because of the American dream and all that good stuff. But the second last little bit's what I'm interested in showing you guys, and that is about the Dust Bowl. So can you guys all see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, here we go.
Look depressing.
right?
Baked out, blown out, and broke. Year in, year out, uncomplaining, they fought the worst drought in history. Their stock choked to death on the barren land. Their homes were nightmares of swirling dust, night and day. Many went ahead of them, but many stayed until stock, machinery, homes, credit, food, and even hope were gone. On to the west. Once again, they headed for the setting sun. Once again, they headed west. Last year, in every summer month, 30,000 people left the Great Plains and hit the highways for the Pacific coast, the last border. Blown out, baked out, and broke. Nothing to stay for, nothing to hope for. Homeless, penniless, and bewildered, they joined the great army of the highway. No place to go, and no place to stop. Nothing to eat, nothing to do. Their homes on four wheels, their work a desperate gamble for a day's labor in the fields along the highway. The price of a sack of beans or a tank of gas. All they ask is a chance to start over, and a chance for their children to eat, to have medical care, to have homes again. 50,000 a month. The sun and winds wrote the most tragic chapter in American agriculture.
Give me a second. I'm gonna let them run in.
$400 million acres. The Great Plains seemed inexhaustible. Yet in 50 years, we turned a part of it into a dust bowl. We put too many cattle and sheep in it. We granted homesteads of rangeland that never should have been plowed. We tore up grass for war needs. We invented new machinery, making it possible for one man cheaply to plow thousands of acres. An unprecedented drought completed the havoc. There was no grass left to hold the light soil against the high winds. A 50-year record, 40 million acres of land ruined, perhaps forever. 200 million acres badly damaged. A great part of this vast area of damaged land can be saved. And the federal government has worked strenuously during the past few years to restore these lands. The Soil Conservation Service, the Forest Service, the CCC, and the Resettlement Administration are cooperating with the Department of Agriculture in working 65 land improvement projects in the plains. The Resettlement Administration will take title to 5,800,000 acres of this land and put it to its proper agricultural use. On a second front, the federal government is working to rehabilitate the stricken farmers of the drought area. Various emergency agencies have distributed millions of dollars in direct relief and thousands of farmers from dire poverty. The Resettlement Administration has loaned millions to farmers whose lands were not damaged beyond repair, but who needed seed, farm equipment, and credit in order to carry on. Most important, the Resettlement Administration is taking over 4,500 farms in the drought area, and it will move families from this land that cannot be farmed into natural agricultural districts. Model farmsteads such as this one being constructed in Nebraska are being built to house these resettled farmers, and they not only will be paid for their old farms, but they will be given a chance to buy their new homes on long-term credit. Modern equipment, irrigation, good lands, electricity, sanitation, schools. The Resettlement Administration is bringing these benefits to thousands who are left stranded and without hope. But the winds still blow and the sun still bakes the land. We must practice control and conservation if we are to save the rest of the grass. The rains will come again, the plow will dig again. Another decade of reckless use, and the grasslands will truly be the great American desert.
So now that you guys saw it, especially with that short film, what did that short film kind of do for you, Kelvin? You said it was depressing. Did it really strike a chord with you to see it visually, to see how bad it actually was?
Yeah, I couldn't have been born around that time. I don't know what I would have did. I ain't got. It's just like looking at what we got now compared to what they had back then. It just makes you want to be more grateful for what you got, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
I did some math there because I was looking at the numbers they gave that was given out to the farmers, and I thought that was pretty interesting. $21.4 million to 155,000 farmers. That was roughly $1,381 per farm, which is about 30 grand today. So, I mean, it's not a whole lot to just pack up and leave everything and have to relocate. So, you know, I couldn't imagine the struggle back then. I mean, that's just, I guess you could make that a similar case to flooding around here, where I know a person when them bad floods came through here a couple of years back, a family had to relocate, and I just couldn't imagine having to go through that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the film captured beautifully like what a dust storm actually looked like. Um, yeah, then the next day, the aftermath and seeing all that dust just piled everywhere around, like you couldn't see anything that wasn't dust. Um, very, very striking imagery. Today, if we think about the Midwest, I don't know if you guys have ever been far west in the Midwest, but even if you go over into like Ohio, you can see like all this farmland, just green everywhere. Imagine that being just nothing but dust. Um, as the film said, a lot of it was due to our own bad practices. Human beings caused this ecological disaster by over farming the land, um, especially with industrial agriculture. So,
If I may,
go ahead.
I'm from Oklahoma. I've seen dust storms, and yes, the video did show what it's like. I haven't seen one to that degree, obviously. Um, but yeah, there are still lots of farmers out there who are trying and trying to produce the same crop year after year after year, even though it's destroying their land. They still haven't learned, even after 1920s, that you need to aerate the soil. You need to bring in different types of crops so that you can have healthy produce. And you still get glimpses of the Great Depression in certain farming lands in Oklahoma.
What's the staple crop that they mostly make?
There's no one stable crop, but it's mostly wheat and grass for the horses and the cattle. But you have to produce beans or green beans or some sort of legume to help bring in more nitrogen into the soil in between crops. And a lot of farmers aren't doing that.
Yeah, so how little we learn sometimes from the past. So yeah, that documentary was actually made by a guy named Per Lawrence. Per Lawrence, and that was somebody who Steinbeck admired. Um, Steinbeck was there. Steinbeck doesn't really write from experience so much in this first part of the book because he wasn't from Oklahoma, but a film like that kind of inspired him to write this first section of the novel that we read for today. I just want to tell you guys about a couple of other things, and then we'll get rolling. But one of the, I don't know, how many of you guys in here have taken creative writing with Jamie?
I
Some of
have.
you.
I have.
One of the interesting things about the Grapes of Wrath is, especially if you're a creative-minded person, is you might ask yourself what goes on in a writer's head when they write a novel. Well, there's actually a book, Working Days, the Journals of the Grapes of Wrath, and it's on reserve over at the library for you if you want to look through it. But you actually can kind of see a day by day journal of what Steinbeck wrote in the novel. What day, like what was he going through that day? What were some obstacles that he was facing? When did he get writer's block? It's a fascinating read. I would actually encourage you guys, if you have time to go in there, to look through it. And as we work through the novel over the next 3 weeks, maybe you like take a look at the sections for the parts that we're reading. You can kind of get a nice idea as far as things that he was experiencing, things that he was going through. He wrote this entire novel in 6 months, which as a book as long as the novel is, as ambitious as the novel is, that was quite an undertaking. He wrote the entire novel from May to October 1938. So that's really not that long of a period of time. Yeah, you can see a lot of his thinking. You can kind of see, like, what does he want to do that day? What does he want to accomplish? You can kind of get some insights into what he's thinking about his characters. He would always start each day with like a warm up, and this was what he wrote as his warm up to kind of get his mind going. And then he would try to do his writing, and some days he got far, some days he stumbled. So it's an interesting, if you want to see like what creativity looks like, it's an interesting book to read. I'm just looking here, entry 10, June 9th, 1938, 11:45 on a Thursday. And he's talking about Muley, the character Muley that we read today. Late start today. Last night, 2 boys down from Stanford. They tied me in knots as nicely as I could do it to anyone when I was in Stanford. Nice kids and bright and alert ones. I like to see them and hear them. They cross-examined me on the universe and man. Found difficulty in getting out of this book long enough to be anything but dull. The single-track mind seems to be a narrow gauge as well. Now to the day's work, and now Muley comes in, and the reason for the desertion becomes apparent. Also, the night comes from sleeping in the darkening plain and stars. And after that, I think a small inner chapter to maybe a large one dealing with the equipment of migration. Well, here goes for Muley. Well, that is done. I like Muley. He is a fine hater. Let's write a few letters now. So again, you can just kind of see his thoughts as he's composing the book, which as a person who isn't that creative myself, I'm a literature critic and a philosopher. I'm not really an author of creative works, but as a person who isn't creative myself, I think it's super interesting to kind of read his thoughts, his journals as he's writing. So especially if you got some of you guys later in the semester might do your research papers on Grapes of Wrath, maybe. That's a good tool to look at. So I don't know what else needs to be said there. But that book is there in the library for you on reserve if you want to take a look. But as far as actually digging their hands into the novel now, one of the things to mention about the novel is, I don't know if you guys noticed, that Steinbeck he usually writes one chapter that's kind of like a narrative commentary on events. And then he writes a chapter about the Joad family. So it kind of goes inner chapter, regular chapter, inner chapter, regular chapter. So that's kind of the structure of this thing. A lot of the social commentary in the novel is in those inner chapters where the narrator almost kind of like gives you a sermon in a way during those inner chapters about different things that are happening. We actually ended our reading for today on one of those inner chapters about the western states. And so you guys can kind of see why I stopped you where I stopped you, because we're now getting ready to move west. But I like the what's your guys' experience with the book so far? Do you kind of like that regular chapter and then inner chapter structure of the novel? How's that rhythm going for you so far?
It's definitely different, but I do think it's like a nice break in between, like the significant plot points of the book.
Right, kind of gives you a nice breather in between, because usually the big chapters are actually pretty big, so it usually gives you a nice breather, right?
I was gonna say about the big chapter. I hated chapter 5. I liked all the information in it, um, but I'm reading on the Kindle version, so I'm reading off my phone. So reading the same chapter for 45 minutes, staring at small text wasn't the most fun. But other than that, I do like his writing style. I like how quick and short and straight to the point most of his writing is. And I think it was one of the videos that you sent on Steinbeck where it said that his critics say that he didn't deserve the Nobel Prize because his writing was too, it was just nostalgic and there wasn't any substance to it. I find that there is more substance in the nostalgia factor than the stuffy factor of just getting words on paper.
Yeah, the fact that his books are so political, um, that turns a lot of that turned a lot of critics off, right? Because they think
Oh,
that,
I could see him upsetting quite a few people.
yeah, this a lot of, like, whenever you think of other great writers from the time period, like Faulkner or Hemingway or Joyce, Woolf, those modernist writers, a lot of times that movement sought to write something great that was kind of apolitical in a way. Like, it should be something that would last through the ages and not be and be kind of be removed from the political world. Um, so Steinbeck's aesthetic is definitely different than what the mainstream was. Um, a lot of there's a nasty word for literature like this, and that's called didactic. Right? A lot of people say Steinbeck's too didactic. Didactic literature means literature that teaches you some type of like moral lesson. So think about something didactic like the fables. Like a lot of the fables teach you moral lessons. Maybe some of the stuff you read in Brit Lit, some of the early medieval stuff, right? A lot of that teaches you some type of like moral lesson. The Pardoner's Tale by Chaucer, right? That one's a classic didactic work. But whenever we're talking about literature of this time period, a lot of people see that this book's trying to teach you something. It says that a lot of people think that it's trying to teach you something, and they think that that's a fault in the creativity. Um, I personally don't hold that view, right? Like I think, especially now, I think it's interesting. It's an interesting way to look back at the past and kind of see this historical event that happened. Kind of see like what kind of with the Joad family, you kind of get a nice overview of what the average family kind of went through. So in a way, the book's good historical fiction in that regard.
But yeah, I like Steinbeck because of it's like we've recently discussed. He's straight to the point. I mean, he may write in a simple manner, but at the same time, he tells stories with such detail. Like with the Joad family, he almost makes you feel like you're a part of the family, that you actually went through the event with them. And any writer who is capable of telling a story like that, and especially history, through the lens of one family, I think that's just great, and it keeps you engaged and interested in the reading. I feel like Steinbeck isn't one of those authors who you keep reading and you're like, what in the world is this guy trying to, what's he getting at? And then you just throw the book across the room. No, you read it and you understand what point he's trying to make there. So, I mean, I really appreciate and enjoy his style of writing, especially history, because I'm a history nerd anyway. So,
Right. Yeah, I very much think the same, Shane. And today you see Steinbeck is still a very popular writer, even if literary critics don't appreciate him much. He's still one of America's most popular writers. He sells hundreds of thousands of books a year still. So there's something to be said about that you're popular with even people who aren't English majors, right? Like nobody really reads. I would make the claim, who reads Ulysses unless you're an English major, right? Probably not many people. So
right. Yeah. And Steinbeck is more open to everyone. People could feel like they can approach him better than these other authors, like you were saying.
yeah, let's dig into the characters of the novel now. Of course, let's start with the Reverend Jim Casey. The Reverend Jim Casey. He's probably my favorite character in the novel. Um, Shane, you could probably guess why. Because he's kind of the philosophical person in the novel, right? So of course I would gravitate to that. Um, but shortly after Tom Joad gets out of prison, as he's walking towards his family's house, he sees Jim Casey kind of out in the wilderness all by himself. Um, there's a New Testament figure who was all out in the woods, all out in the wilderness by himself, preaching the news. Who was it?
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist, right? So Jim Casey's kind of functioning as this like John the Baptist type of character in the book. But the problem with Jim Casey is he kind of lost his faith, right? He tells you from the very first few chapters that he lost his faith. He kind of abused his power as a preacher, right? Because he kind of insinuates he's kind of like one of these like holy roller preachers, right? They feel, they get wound up during their services. And what he would do is a lot of the times he would get these people wound up, especially the women, and then he would, while they were wound up, they would sleep together, right? And eventually, after enough of that, he started losing his faith a little bit, maybe because of his guilt. So he's kind of a preacher who has lost his faith from the very beginning. But at the same time, um, he's got new ideas that are starting to spring to his mind just from living his life. I'm looking at chapter 4. I don't know what your guys' page numbers look like. I'm using this one. Um, just taking a look at a couple of passages. Let's see. Page 234 is what I'm looking at, right during the middle of Casey and Tom's conversation. I'll actually start on page 233. The passage starts, I'm glad you told me, said Casey. I used to think it was just me. Finally, it give me such pain I quit and went off by myself and give her a damn good thinking about. He doubled up his legs and scratched between his dry, dusty toes. I says to myself, what's gnawing you? Is it the screwing? And I says, no, it's the sin. And I says, why is it that when a fella ought to be just about mule-ass proof against sin and all full up of Jesus, why is it that the times a fella gets fingering his pants buttons? He laid 2 fingers down in his palm in rhythm, as though he gently placed each word there side by side. I says, maybe it ain't a sin. Maybe it's just the way folks is. Maybe we've been whipping the hell out of ourselves for nothing. And I thought how some sisters took to beating themselves with a 3-foot shag of barbed wire. I thought how maybe they like to hurt themselves, and maybe I like to hurt myself. Well, I was laying under a tree when I figured that out, and I went to sleep. And it come night, and it was dark when I come to. There was a coyote squawking nearby. Before I knowed it, I was saying out loud, the hell with it. There ain't no sin and there ain't no virtue. There's just stuff people do. It's all part of the same thing. Some of the things folks do is nice, and some ain't nice, but that's as far as any man got a right to say. He paused and looked up from the palm of his hand where he had laid down the words. Then another little bit down, Casey spoke again, and his voice rang with pain and confusion. I says, what's this called, this spirit? I says, it's love. I love people so much I'm fit to bust sometimes. I says, don't you love Jesus? Well, I thought, and finally I says, no, I don't know nobody named Jesus. I know a bunch of stories, but I only love people. Sometimes I love them fit to bust, and I want to make them happy, so I've been preaching something I thought would make them happy. Then I've been talking a hell of a lot. Maybe you wonder about me using bad words. Well, they ain't bad to me no more. They're just words folks use, and they don't mean nothing bad with them. Anyways, I'll tell you one more thing I thought out, and from a preacher, it's the most unreligious thing, and I can't be a preacher no more because I thought it and I believe it. What's that? Tom said. Casey looked shyly at him. If it hits you wrong, don't take no offense at it. I don't take no offense except a bust in the nose, said Jode. What did you figure? I figured about the Holy Spirit and the Jesus road. I figured, why do we have to hang it on God or Jesus? Maybe I figured maybe it's all men and all women we love. Maybe that's the Holy Spirit, the human spirit, the whole shebang. Maybe all men got one big soul everybody's a part of. Now I sat there thinking, and all of a sudden I knew it. I knew it so deep down that it was true, and I still know it. So I'll read you guys another passage, and then we'll see what you think of this philosophy. Casey's philosophy is going to be central to understanding the novel, so that's why I'm spending a lot of time on it. But another section we read for today is pretty close to the end of our reading. In chapter 13, this was when Grandpa Jode dies, right? Grandpa Jode dies right before they leave Oklahoma, which is symbolic. We can talk about why Steinbeck would kill Grandpa right there. But I'm looking at page 362. It's pretty close to the end of the chapter, cut 3 or 4 pages before the end of the chapter. You guys will probably remember this passage as soon as I read it because it's a pretty striking one. So Grandma asks Casey to say a prayer, right? He's the preacher, and they can't understand, like he's going through a crisis of faith or something like that. They just, in the community, they think of him as the preacher. So, of course, he goes with the Jodes on their journey. So he doesn't know how to pray anymore, right? Because he's kind of gone through this crisis of faith. Casey said, it'll be a short one. Bowed his head and the others followed his lead. Casey said solemnly, This here old man just lived a life and just died out of it. I don't know whether he was good or bad. That don't matter much. He was alive, and that's what matters. Now he's dead, and that don't matter. Heard a fella tell a poem one time, and he says, all that lives is holy. Got to thinking, and pretty soon it means more than the word says. And I wouldn't pray for an old fellow that's dead. He's all right. He's got a job to do, but it's all laid out for him, and there's only one way out to do it. But us, we got a job to do, and there's 1,000 ways, and we don't know which one to take. And if I was to pray, it'd be for the folks that don't know which way to turn. Grandpa here, he got the easy straight. Now cover him up and let him get to his work. He raised his head. Then everybody says, Amen, after. Right? So, Casey, I would argue Casey has lost the Christian faith, right? What he starts to say is Christians would deem heresy. But he's kind of got this idea that everything that lives is holy, right? We're all part of a larger soul. There's a one soul, and there's a one world soul, and we're all part of it. That's kind of his conclusion that he has reached after his journey. This philosophy, this way of looking at God, is more of an Eastern way of thought. If this is, in a nutshell, what Hindus believe, right? Hindus believe that there's one God, Brahman, and out of the one God, Brahman, has sprung up hundreds of other gods. But and as human beings, we are all part of the Brahman. And Hindus believe we go through life and death and reincarnation, but eventually, what will happen is the way to salvation is you will eventually become one with the big soul again. You will become one with Brahman. So, Shane, you're probably remembering all this from philosophy last semester, right?
Yep.
But so yeah, really interesting ideas that Casey's espousing. It's interesting that he's still, even when he's saying this stuff, he's still kind of seen as the pillar of wisdom, right? He's the preacher. That's his title, even if he's not, even if he's lost his faith along the way. What do you guys think of these ideas so far that he's talking about, or even this character in general? What you're thinking, Ben, on him so far?
I could be wrong with thinking this, but in some ways, and it could be a stretch, is it kind of reminds me of the To a God Unknown with Joseph Wayne in some ways, because of how he feels like he's one with nature. We're one with nature. There's that oneness theme there. It seems like in Steinbeck's writings thus far. And here they're wanting rain. It's the dust is literally killing people, driving them out of their homeland. And in To a God Unknown, they were wanting rain, and Joseph Wayne was doing everything he could to try to get the rain. And here you have Casey, who's trying to feel things out with this, with him feeling like we're all one and it's one spirit, and he doesn't really know God. And literally in the title To a God Unknown, Joseph Wayne didn't know higher power. So there's some similarities there, I feel like. So yeah, it's pretty interesting how it seems to all relate there. So yeah.
Yeah, if you go back and look at some passages from To a God Unknown, there's some really similar passages in there. You're exactly right, Shane. Yeah, this idea of oneness, we're all part of one thing. Maybe that one thing is God, maybe that one thing is nature. And To God Unknown, it almost felt like it was nature. Um, so yeah, I'm glad you make that connection, Shane. That's a good thing about reading, taking a single author course, because you start to notice patterns in the work, and so that's good. You're starting to notice some patterns in his thinking. Um, what about some of the rest of y'all? What did you think of the preacher as a character? His philosophy, uh, even his loss of faith. You guys have any thoughts on him?
I don't know if I would consider it a loss of faith.
He developed a new faith, I would you could say, right?
Right, a development of faith. But I thought it was very interesting. Um, the I don't know if the Dust Bowl caused this, if um, watching people starve out caused it, just the whole Great Depression in general caused it, or if he naturally come to these conclusions and would have come to these conclusions because of who he was anyway. Um, so I'm just ready to read more about him, I guess.
Yeah, you guys can probably start to see that he has an influence on Tom, right? Tom almost is like a wet sponge absorbing all the stuff that Casey's saying. So yeah, I am excited for you guys to read the next part of the book, see where everything starts going. Um, but yeah, I think you're right, Ron. Like he hasn't lost his faith. He's developed a new ideas, right? They're not Judeo-Christian ideas, but they're still want to do a high degree of spiritualism in them. Like I said, they're more reminiscent of Hinduism. The poem that he's talking about in that passage, "All that lives is holy," um, that actually comes from a William Blake poem, "The Marriage of Heaven and Hell." Of course, you guys might, I don't know if you guys know much Blake. He was one of the great romantic poets, and he was an artist as well as a poet. And Blake was one of the poets who really admired Milton's Paradise Lost and drew a lot of interesting art from it. So maybe you guys studied some Blake in your Brit Lit course. I don't know. He's one of my favorite poets from that time period.
I love the poem by him, The Lamb, Little Lamb Who Made Thee.
That's a great one.
It is.
Yeah, whenever you talk about those poets in that time period, Blake, Shelley, Wordsworth, Keats, all those romantic poets, I think Blake and Shelley are my favorites. I've never been that big on Keats or Wordsworth. I think Wordsworth's boring, but that's just me. So yeah, this is something to keep track of as you read. Keep thinking about what's going on with Casey. Um, Tom, of course, is our main character, Tom Joad, and we learn from the very beginning of the novel that he just got out of prison he got into a fight and accidentally killed a guy during the fight. So he's been in prison for a number of years. So whenever he comes out of prison, it's almost like he's discovering a whole new world. He doesn't realize all the stuff has happened to his land. So Tom, I think Shane, you said earlier that Tom, that it's almost like we're going along the ride with the Jodes. Um, I think part of that is because of how Tom is written, right? Because Tom is seeing all this with brand new, fresh eyes. So he's going along on this journey just after he got out of prison. So, and we find out, of course, if he leaves the state line, he's breaking his probation, which is a big problem, right? But Tom is almost. I think the way that he wrote Tom, we're going along on the ride with Tom, right? Because Tom is almost seeing the world fresh for the first time as well. Um, Tom's a guy who doesn't take any crap, right? Like that's his whole shtick. Like he's very no nonsense. Um, he's very dedicated to his family. He doesn't understand. Like one of the heartbreaking scenes in the novel is when he goes back to his old farm, and his old farm is deserted. Muley is there, right? Muley's the ghost that's kind of like lingering around the farm. But so yeah, Tom is almost the spark that fuels the plot in a way because he's kind of seeing all this from fresh eyes. Now, what do you guys think of Tom so far? You think he's a interesting character? Um, you kind of see him like I was just describing, maybe like a way for the reader to go on the journey.
Yeah, just somebody for the reader to see through unfiltered, unbiased eyes, I guess.
Right. What about some of the rest of your thoughts on Tom? Anything
Like you,
about it? Go ahead, Shane.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
It's kind of like you were saying, Tom's fresh out of jail and he shows up and realizes that his family is gone and the dust is taken over and it's pretty much deserted and then when he runs into his neighbor, he tells them that they're at Uncle John's house. So Tom's like, well, in some ways, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So now here we got to figure out what we're going to do with this. So he's just somewhat alone for the ride, just to see what's going on, how they're going to make the best out of it. Um, and then later, he goes and he meets with his family and realizes that they're going to head out to California. So, and then of course the issue with the probation and stuff, but he just has to go along with it to uh, make a new life for his family. So it's
I
just
agree
what,
with Shane.
yeah,
Despite his situation, I kind of look at a situation of, you got to learn from your lessons and you just got to make the best out of what you got and just moving forward, learning from your mistakes.
Right.
I thought that, I mean, I think he has some interesting actions as a character, but it doesn't seem like he expresses a lot of like interesting thoughts in the way that like the preacher does.
Yeah, I would say that's a so far thing, right? He definitely started. Again, I like to think of Tom as almost like a sponge, right? He absorbs all this stuff, and he goes through a nice arc. But so far, I think you're right, Hunter. He's not really espousing a lot of ideas or anything like that just yet. Um, he's very quick to anger. Well, that's nothing that you guys noticed, but he has quite a temper. The very beginning of the novel, when he gets in the car with the truck driver, right? The truck driver is kind of like nosy and like keeps asking him questions, trying to get to the fact that he was fresh out of jail. He gets like super annoyed with him. He gets super annoyed with Muley. Um, so that's definitely one of his character traits. Very quick to anger. Um,
Well, and obviously he's not a person to follow rules either, because the sign said no riders. He hitches a ride anyway, and he's on probation. He breaks probation, so
right? Quite a rule breaker. Of course, that raises the question, like, what's the point of being on probation in Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl, right? What can you really do if you stay in the state? Um, Not much,
somewhat of a death sentence then.
right? You might as well just stay in prison where you get a nice meal every day rather than have to go struggle out in that.
But they were talking about that and about one of the guys specifically breaking parole so that he could stay in prison because it was a better situation than being with his family.
Right? Yeah, of course, you still see that a lot even today. Right? People would rather stay in prison than go out into this disaster of a economy we even have today. It wasn't as disastrous as it was then, but it's, yeah. So we won't even make that comparison. But people today will still stay in jail just to live live easy. The heart and soul of this novel is in Majode. Majode is really the heart and soul of the novel. I told you guys last week that anybody, because we last week with Vice and Men, Curly's wife was the only woman in the novel. I told you guys then that any charges that Steinbeck doesn't know how to write women is absurd if you read this book. Because Ma is really the heart and soul of the Jode family. You got Pa Jode too, but Pa seems kind of defeated, right, at the very beginning of this. Like this, everything that's happened with the Dust Bowl, losing the farm and all that stuff. Pa Jode's he's kind of like walking around with his shoulders stooped all the time, right? He's kind of almost given up. Same with Uncle John, right? Uncle John is an alcoholic, right? So at the top, the novel's kind of challenging this the patriarchal style family, right? This is a matriarchal family. Ma Jode is almost at the heart and soul of everything. And, you guys will keep seeing this as we keep reading. But even with parts that we read for today, um, there's that great scene where she is going through all of her belongings and she's throwing stuff out and all of that. That which is one of the um, heartbreaking scenes of the novel. But she's the backbone. She's who's driving them towards California. Right? She's who's pushing them on. So I don't know. Are you guys reading her that way? Do you kind of see her as a really strong character thus far?
I am.
You talking about Major, right?
Right.
Yeah. She the backbone for sure.
Right. She's the heart, right? You said you're seeing her that way, Braun. You want to elaborate on that?
I mean, I don't know. Like you said, I just feel as if she is the matriarch of the family. She is the one that everybody's looked up to. And well, I mean, especially with Grandpa dying now, she is the last, you know, the I guess the final spine, the final piece of the backbone that's holding the entire family up.
Yeah, that's a good point with Grandpa's death, right? That is really the turning point where she becomes the backbone.
The piggyback off of Braun, she's like she basically like symbolizes like the strength of the family, her compassion. I think Braun said the word monarchy. She presents all that, all the traits that a mother would or a grandmother would, the power, the authority, the love and sacrifice, the unconditional love. She presents all that, and that's what I believe keeps the family thriving and going. As they make their way to California and etc.
Yeah, the next part of the novel you read will be their journey to California. So you guys will really see how she steps up in that section. I love the passage in chapter 10 um, about Ma. If you watch the Grapes of Wrath film, um, it's one of the great scenes in that film too. It's pretty close to the end of the chapter. It says Ma was just through the door and she heard his words. Slowly her relaxed face tightened and the lines disappeared from the taut, muscular face. Her eyes sharpened and her shoulders straightened. She glanced about the stripped room. Nothing was left in it except trash. Mattresses which had been on the floor were gone. The burkas were sold. On the floor lay a broken comb, an empty talcum powder can, and a few dust mice. Ma set her lantern on the floor. She reached behind one of the boxes that had served as chairs and brought out a stationery box, old and soiled and cracked at the corners. She sat down and opened the box. Inside were letters, clippings, photographs, a pair of earrings, a little gold signet ring, and a watch chain braided of hair and tipped with gold swivels. Touched the letters with her fingers, touched them lightly, and she smoothed a newspaper clipping on which there was an account of Tom's trial. A long time she held the box, looking over it, and her fingers disturbed the letters and then lined them up again. She bit her lower lip, thinking, remembering, and at last she made up her mind. She picked out the ring, the watch charm, the earrings, dug under the pile, and found one gold cuff link. She took a letter from an envelope and dropped the trinkets in the envelope. She folded the envelope over and put it in her dress pocket. Then gently and tenderly she closed the box and smoothed the top carefully with her fingers. Her lips parted. And then she stood up, took her lantern, and went back into the kitchen. She lifted the stove lid and laid the box gently among the coals. Quickly the heat browned the paper. The flame licked up and over the box. She replaced the stove lid and instantly the fire sat up and breathed over the box. Kind of like a nice moment where, well, it's not a nice moment, but it's kind of this symbolic moment where they're burning everything that's in the past, right? The past no longer matters. It's all about the present at this point. Um, so quite a moment in that part. That's one of my favorite scenes. Whenever I read the book, I don't really think about that scene, but if you guys watch the film, the film really kind of dramatizes that scene and makes you hit you in the feels. We got a couple other characters too. Of course, we got Pa. We've already kind of characterized him, right? He's not really the heart and soul of the family anymore. Let's talk about Grandpa now, since this is the part of the novel he's in. Um, to talk about Grandpa, I think we need to historicize a bit. I don't know how much you guys are up on your American history, but if you remember from the first days of the American Republic, um, there was a large contention in our government between the Jefferson and Hamilton. Um, Jefferson's vision of America was a vision of agriculture, right? He really wanted um, Americans to stretch out all over America and have their own farms. He thought that farming was the best way to exert individuality, right? You own that piece of land. That piece of land is yours. It doesn't belong to nobody else. It belongs to you. So compare that to the Hamilton version of America, which is what we became. And that's the vision of factories and industrialization, mechanization, big cities over small town farming. Like that was his vision of America, and that's of course the vision that uh, came to pass for the most part. With Jefferson's vision, you can kind of still see it in the farmlands out in the Great Plains. Um, there's a value, there's a dignity in being a small farmer, right? No one tells you what to do. You own that land. You make your own food. There's a certain dignity in it. That land almost becomes part of your DNA. So I guess kind of what we're seeing in the book is really the death of the Jeffersonian vision of America, right? Um, all these people are having to give up their land, and it's a heartbreaking thing. You might wonder, it's just just a house on a piece of land somewhere, right? What's the big deal? We're several generations into our country at that point, right? People had owned these families had owned that land for 100 years or longer. So suddenly, something that's part of their identity is almost just kind of like ripped from them, and that's kind of really what we see with Grandpa Jode here, right? He he doesn't live a day past when they cross the state border, right? Because that land is part of who he is, and like I guess the what would be the point of living for him after he leaves it? It's that part of his DNA, I guess you could say. Um, what do you guys think of this idea, the death of Jefferson's America, right? The death of a small farmer. Um, which vision of America do you agree with? That might be a good question to discuss. Which version do you agree with? Do you think there's a value in being a country of small farmers? Um, somebody kick us off on this one.
Well, I mean, mechanization has absolutely screwed us all over here in West Virginia, you know. So, I mean, prior when there were family clans and farming in our area in the, 1850s, 60s, up until maybe the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. And then you started getting coal, and then they introduced all the machines. And then, of course, that upped the greed and everybody flying in here to line their pockets. So, I mean, I guess in some ways, Dr. Yeager, I would probably have to introduce somewhat of a middle path here, is that it's good to have, big business in some ways and in some areas, and then you got to have farming too, for our food, in hopes of creating an independent country, which some ways I don't think we really are anymore. But um, so uh, maybe a nice balance there some way. I don't even know if that's possible. Of course, I don't think we have that anymore. But it's just it's a tough topic there, for me anyway, because of what has happened here and
Yeah.
the economy now.
Yeah, think about all the people in McDowell County, right? They owned that land for generations, and then with the downturn of the economy, how many people left, right? It's the same kind of thing.
Hmm. Yep. So
Mhm.
it's just a tough one to feel out there on that. So
Yeah,
I'm going to jump in here. I have to agree with Shane. You have to have both. Otherwise, if you have just a small or a community of just small farmers, that's not going to go anywhere. They'll trade their produce amongst each other, but then their produce will all die, as proven by the Dust Bowl. So you have to have business. You have to have. It might not be fun for everybody. It might not be what everybody likes, but you have to have this to keep the wheels turning, I guess.
and of course, what you'll see in the book as we keep going is agriculture has changed even by the 1920s, 1930s. Um, Even today, agriculture has changed. We're no longer. It's rare. It's really rare today to see the small town farmer. Um, Most of the agricultural output in our country is mechanized agriculture. Like if you go out to Steinbeck country today, I told you guys before that land in between San Francisco and Fresno is where a lot of the agricultural output in our country is made today, all over Northern California. But
Is it not better that way though? Because
well,
there's less diseases, there's less. Um, uh, they're able to produce more, so they can feed more. The animals that they produce or butcher or sell have less diseases. There's less Munchausen syndrome, um, and just better managed.
I think you got a good argument there. It's hard to argue that it's not more productive at producing good yields. But at the same time, what has happened is these billionaire farmers have sprung up, and they own thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres of land. Just one farmer. What
But
comes?
that farmer's not a billionaire though. That farmer, well, the bank again. The bank is the enemy. The bank is the one that's the multi-billionaire in this situation because they are loaning all the money to that farmer so that he can have the multi-million-dollar equipment. And yes, the farm is going to produce millions of dollars worth of food, but all of that money is going to go right back to the bank, and he's going to have maybe a little bit more than what the blue collar worker would have.
Not well. I see what you're saying, but not necessarily. Like a lot of these, like there's farmers who own all this stuff, even debt free from the bank. So what happens is you have one guy who owns all this land. So what happens then? Who works the land? Well, you have to go work for somebody else at that point, right? And you can argue that when it comes to farming, you lose a little bit of your dignity when you do that, right? Because Jefferson's vision was the dignity of the small town farmer. Well, if you go work for somebody else and they're telling you how much you're going to make, um, well, while they're taking in the profits, then you could argue your labor is being taken advantage of.
But that's literally every single job.
Right?
It's every single job out there, other than the farmer who owns and produces for his own work. So the small town farmer is the only one that has any dignity. Is I guess what I'm getting from that statement.
Yeah, that's how Jefferson saw it, right? The only small town farmer is the way you can kind of achieve your dignity. But you're exactly right. It's hard to argue that we don't live in an age where all the jobs are like that, right? Somebody's at the top, rest of us are exploited in some way for our labor most of the time.
It's like with coal, when we started booming in the 20s, and I guess around the 40s too, you had, African American workers. You had, I think it was Eastern European workers, the Italian, the Polish, the Hungarian workers coming in. Why? So they could pay them a lot less to work harder, so that the mine owners and the railroad workers who were laying track can make a ton of money, while the people who were just the poor workers weren't making much at all. And then, of course, when the machines were introduced, that put a lot of people out of jobs too. So it's just a lot of stuff that gets factored into that mess. And if the cards aren't played right, we end up with the mess that we have now. So somebody didn't play the cards right, especially in the
Right.
West Virginia legislature voted on so many bills to strengthen the or the coal industry, and they put all their eggs in one basket, like so many people often do. And then when they drop the basket, guess what? It's over. So yeah, welcome to 2024. Make some lemonade, guys, with the lemons we've been given. So
Yeah, there's whole classes on West Virginia history, and I've always said, what's the point of taking that class? You can sum it up in one day: the coal industry screwed us. The end. Right?
right. You can just write that simple statement there and say the end. That's it. That's my soapbox. I apologize.
I definitely agree with you on
No, I'm following. Um, the the novel and one or two of the videos picked up on it too. Though was in the 1920s there were thousands of jobs out here. Um, there are thousands of jobs for multiple people to come out here and start working in the coal mines and develop their own black lung. And there are thousands of jobs for people to work in the um, on the railroad tracks. But the problem is there were tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people who were displaced by the Great Depression, who just brought the Great Depression everywhere else that they went, because no matter how well West Virginia was doing with the the coal mining industry, they couldn't produce enough jobs for everybody. And the only thing to do out west, like there was no oil yet, there was nothing like that. The only thing to do out there was
that.
farm.
Yeah, you just mentioned earlier the banks, Ron. The banks are really what screwed over the small town farmers, because a lot of the small town farmers would, like you said, took loans to get their farm equipment and stuff like that. And then as soon as this Dust Bowl hit, that's when they started foreclosing on all these people. So eventually you just had nothing but bank owned property from all the foreclosures that they did because people couldn't pay on their loan. Um, Andrew Jackson was the president who really distrusted the banks. Right? He thought that the banks were the biggest thing. Andrew Jackson's presidency was all about the small, um, common American, common white American, I should say. Um, yeah, but he thought that the banks were the biggest enemy to our liberty, and
Andrew Jackson was the one that borrowed money from his slaves and paid them back, right?
I don't know about that. I'd have to look. I'd have to research that.
If I'm not mistaken, he was the one that borrowed money from his slaves to build up the Andrew Jackson Museum house that he has, and then he paid them all back.
If I'm not badly mistaken, he actually balanced the budget too, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he abolished the federal bank.
And he is on the $20 bill.
Right, which is an irony, right?
Right.
He was a knothead. He really wasn't the best person at all. Trail of Tears, different story though.
But I've always said he's one of the most important presidents of early America because he did stabilize the economy, and he expanded the powers of the presidency to places it never went before. Um, but he was definitely is not a good person. The Trail of Tears and all that stuff. There's a whole movement today to still abolish him from the 20. That movement hasn't gotten anywhere, I don't think.
Yeah, they were trying to add Harriet Tubman to the 20 bill almost a decade ago, if I'm not mistaken. It hasn't said anything now.
Yeah, that's Trump's role model is Andrew Jackson. So that's probably why they didn't get anywhere when he became president.
Yeah.
But
Oh, actually, there was one thing in the story where I just thought it really showed the Oklahoma, I guess, spirit. So diving back in 1914 or whatever it was, whenever they did the Oklahoma land rush, there were boomers and sooners, right? There were people who went before the legal time to go stake out their land, and then there were people who went at the whenever the cannon sounded, and they were called boomers. The story, like everybody was doing so bad in Oklahoma that they stole this man's land and all of his possessions the moment he left town to go see a movie or whatever it was. And I don't know, I just thought that was a perfect description of the Oklahoma mentality. Was I'm gonna go look out for myself first. But then as soon as he came back, he got all of his stuff back, besides that pillow. Um, even though we're looking out for ourselves, we're still trying to do the right thing in doing so. So I thought that was kind of cool.
right, yeah, that sense of community that existed, even if everybody was trying to be self-reliant and look out for their own families and stuff. Yeah, you see that a little bit starting in the end of our reading for today because the Jode family starts traveling with the other family too. So you kind of start seeing camaraderie of sorts between fellow Oklahomans.
The Wilsons, right?
Wilsons, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to finish my thought from earlier on the mechanization of agriculture. But today, if you go to California, you see that most of the people working at land are um, Hispanic immigrants. So I don't know how many of them are legal and how many of them aren't, but that's who primarily works that farmland out there today is Hispanic immigrants. So they always say that some people do the labor that nobody else wants to. If you travel to that part of California today, you'll see that. That's who primarily does most of that labor today. You can probably imagine they're not being paid that well, right? Yeah, I think that kind of finishes our soapbox on Grandpa, right? Why did Grandpa die at the end of this? Every a land that's part of his DNA, he lost it. So, what point does he have to keep going? I guess. Um, Grandma Jode's kind of like a firecracker. Right? She's kind of sassy. She's a fun character. And then, of course, we got Tom's siblings. We got Rose of Sharon and her and her husband. And then we have Tom's brother as well. So that's pretty much our. And of course, Tom's got two brothers. One of the brothers is Noah. Noah is there's not he's almost like Lenny in Of Mice and Men, right? And then you have yeah, Noah's an interesting character. Then the two little ones, Ruthie is one of them, right? The two little siblings. Then his younger brother. The Joad family is quite a large family, so those are all the characters that we were introduced to in this section, and they're all traveling in this big truck. Right, all their crap is on this big truck. They're all these people are traveling in this big truck. You can imagine how overloaded the car is as they start traveling out west.
The Beverly Hillbillies.
It's exactly what it is, right? The Beverly
I was
Hillbillies.
just thinking that, yeah.
Yeah, that trope. I guess that show was on back in the '60s, right? So that probably wasn't too far removed from all this stuff. Probably wasn't too far removed from the '60s for them to come up with that show. So, yeah, I've heard people give presentations. One of the interesting things to look at is like if you're a car person, just look at all those cars from that time period, right? I had I heard a person give a paper once talking about all the cars that are in the novel and showing pictures of them and stuff. That was a really interesting paper.
Jalopies, I believe it was.
We have one of the middle chapters is about how the used car salesmen were ripping off the families right before they traveled west. Right, they sold them a big heap of junk. So as if there's not enough hate for car salesmen, right? Steinbeck lays it on them here too.
But it's true. And
I agree.
they're trash people.
I'm glad to see that the dislike of car salesmen goes back this far. You know,
Right.
I sold cars for like a few months. I had to get out of there quickly. But
I'm glad
I
you.
knew I knew a salesman like that. And he was one of the best salesmen and celebrated on the lot. He was a trash person.
I work for an insurance company not too far behind them, if not worse.
Are you saying a little bit about that? Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of got to leave your ethics out the window if you go to work in those types of jobs, right? Yeah, that happened. That's why the car salesman would rip these guys off before they moved to California. So took their very last dollar. It's a sad state to see these people, right? These are migrant people. Steinbeck got to know a lot of them because part of his inspiration for writing the novel was he saw how mistreated they were once they got to California. Like he worked as a journalist and visited all these migrant camps and stuff. So he heard them tell their stories and things like that, which helped inspire this novel. I told you guys last week when we read of Mice and Men. Mice and Men was the second novel in that trilogy. The first one was Indubious Battle. If you read that first one, he kind of tries to stay neutral in it. He kind of tries to show both sides. But this is the book where he finally says, you know what? Heck with the other side. I'm really going to show the injustices that are happening. So this is the book where he finally put all his eggs in one basket to really write the story. So I'll be excited to see you guys read the next part. What chapters did I assign for next week? Let me look. I know I split it into three class periods. Give me a second. And next week we'll read chapter 14 and 21. So the reading will be slightly less intense next week. Not as many chapters. I think the way that I divided it is you're going to get to California next time. They'll just get to California, and then that's when the reading will stop for next time. So next week we'll get to see stuff like the Hoovervilles, and we'll start to get a feel for how it was in California. And we'll see what happens with some of the characters. We'll get to talk a lot about the character developments and stuff next week too. So it shall be an interesting week. I did want to spend just a couple of minutes before we leave talking about the short stories, the snake and the chrysanthemums. Which one of those stories stood out to you guys more, the snake or the chrysanthemums?
Definitely the snake.
The snake.
I hated the ending. That was my biggest thing. I didn't know why you would end a story that way, but the way he describes the snake and the woman were very interesting.
The doctor's just left disturbed at the end, right? That's pretty much how it ends.
But what happened to her? Did she die? Did she get hit by a bus? Did
Yeah.
she?
We don't know, right?
What the? Did the snake die from starvation? Did he stop feeding the snake?
That actually, this is a story that actually happened. The doctor is named after Ed Ricketts, who I told you guys about a couple of weeks ago, Steinbeck's friend. But this actually happened to him. A woman actually did go into that lab and asked to do this and acted weird and left. So yeah, he's pretty much just retelling that story in his way. So, he never knew what happened to the lady who in the real life story. So it's part of the mystery, right? What happened to her? It's a pretty disturbing story, isn't it? Like there's lots of like really sexual themes and stuff in the story that are just kind of disturbing once you start thinking about them. What's some of your guys' thoughts? You was going to say something a second ago, Shane. What was you going to say?
Oh no, I was just agreeing with LeBron how it was just a strange story with not a good ending.
Mm-hmm.
Like LeBron was saying, it leaves you in the dark. Like whatever came out of this, it's just a creepy story between a scientist and a curious woman. With the doctor who is doing experiments with animals. Um, with like sexual experiments in some ways, and it's just odd, really odd.
There's a subtext here about animal ethics, right? Because Dr. Phillips is doing these experiments on animals and stuff, and there's a great quote in it. He could kill 1,000 animals for knowledge, but not an insect for pleasure. Been over this in his mind before. So this he's kind of looking at these animals from like this scientific gaze, and whenever we're talking about animal ethics, right? Especially today, we talk about like animal testing and stuff. Is it ethical for us to do testing on animals for medicine or for cosmetic products and stuff like that? It's the same questions applied here, right? The doctor's just doing research on animals, and then suddenly this woman comes in and sort of disturbs his whole state of being in a way. Right? She just wants to watch this snake eat this rat, and she seems to get something out of it, right? I wouldn't even say seem. It's pretty obvious that she gets something out of it. Um, the The passage reads, "The rat stood still, breathing like a little white bellows. Suddenly it leaped in the air and landed on its side. Its legs kicked spasmodically for a second, and it was dead. The woman relaxed sleepily." Right? I don't really have to spell out what that means when it says the woman relaxed sleepily. You guys should be able to infer what happened there. But then, right after that, the doctor refuses to even look at her. He says, if she opens her mouth, I'll be sick. I'll be afraid. So he thinks that she's opening her mouth really big like a snake. So that's a very overt image as well, right? So there's definitely some disturbing layers to the story. I always teach the story in my horror class, right? It's definitely a horrific story. Yeah, this will get you ready for Cannery Row, which we'll read after Grapes of Wrath, because Cannery Row is about the doc, Doctor the doc. That's the main character of the story, Ed Ricketts, and it's a lot of that book is about animals and animal ethics and stuff. So we'll go down some interesting paths with it. The Chrysanthemums is another story about loneliness, right? The the main character, of course, this guy's stopping by just to fix things, and he incites something in her. Um, she's kind of like a really repressed woman, right? Alyssa, she's a really repressed woman, and it's kind of insinuated she's in this like loveless marriage and stuff like that. And then when the salesman comes by, he actually takes an interest in what she's doing. That kind of sort of excites her awake, and it kind of wakens her up. She starts to feel things again. Um, and then, of course, the chrysanthemum is, she gives the chrysanthemum to him in a pot to take to someone else. But at the end of the story, um, the guy just throws the pot. He just takes the pot and he just throws the flower out, right? So she's kind of leaves. The story kind of ends with her feeling sad and depressed, like because
I wonder why she asked about the fights right after she saw that.
right,
I want to fight too.
right, she is feeling. She's wanting to see some bloodshed, right? after after that guy took advantage of her, right? And Steinbeck's short fiction, he he does a nice job, I think, capturing a moment. I think that's part of what he does really well with his short stories. I know you guys are tired, so 2 hours is a long time to sit. So I feel like we had a pretty good class today. So we definitely introduced Grapes of Wrath. So next week we'll be ready to move on to the next bit. The Grapes of Wrath film is available over in the library too. There's a DVD of it over there. If you guys want to watch the film while you read the book, I would say just watch it up until the part where we stop, and then go back and watch the next part just to see how it goes. The film is very different. It's a lot of the stuff that happens in the novel was too risque for the film industry in 1940. But I like to think of them as separate texts. But the film is there for you too if you want to watch it. They've never remade it since because it's seen as one of the great classics of the golden age of Hollywood. But it doesn't go as far as the book. But there's some great scenes in the film. I would encourage you guys to watch it. But that's there for you too. Next time, if you have a moment, go in there and check this book and take a look through this book, Working Days. Again, you can kind of see his creativity at work. As far as your responses go, if you guys want to turn them in by the end of the weekend, that's good with me. You can just focus on anything we talked about today, right? Anything that struck you. Maybe something we didn't talk about that you want to kind of develop and think about. And I'm going to try this weekend to catch up on my gradings. I'm going to get you guys your God Unknown and Mice and Men ones back. So look out for those in the next few days. So y'all feeling good?
I'm good. Yeah.
Deal.
Everything seems good.